No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
Okay, this is a Browning 270. It's my deer rifle. And this is a Savage 7mm 08. This belongs to my grandson. And this was the two rifles that they confiscated. We left about 6 o'clock in the morning. We started across Lake Pontchartrain. As we came out under the drawbridge, a St. Tammany Parish sheriff's boat run up with their lights flashing. Told us to pull over. So we pulled over, and they pulled in about 20 foot from us. And they had 5 guys in the boat, and they had assault weapons, and they pointed them at us and asked if we had any weapons on board. I told them yes, we had 2 weapons. They said, get at the back of the boat with your hands in the air. We're coming aboard to search. They got the guns, they opened the case and looked at them. I was standing at the back of the boat with my hands in the air. Automatic rifles pointed at you. I mean, you don't have any choice. I mean, they didn't just have them pointed from their hip, they had them up at their shoulder pointed, you know. I mean, they weren't playing. They asked where we were going. Told them we were contractors for Pala Interstate. We were going to New Orleans to find a route to come in with a barge. So they said, okay, we're seizing these weapons. So I said, I want a receipt for my guns. They said, no, we're not giving receipts. Said if we give receipts, we'd be out here all day writing receipts for all the weapons we've confiscated. It made me angry when they told me to go get a lawyer if I wanted my guns back. That's when I really got angry. They didn't care what your rights were. They were going to deny them. It's not America as we've known it before. It's changing.
At daybreak, Katrina was roaring, and visibility was next to nothing. The 9 New Orleans firefighters riding her out inside the Lake Marina Tower couldn't see much, but heard plenty.
The wind coming through back here was, I mean, it was like a freight train coming through there, howling noise it was making.
Just after 9 o'clock in the morning, Captain Paul Helmers, an 18-year veteran, saw something he wasn't expecting. Water rising in the back parking lot.
I would say about 10 minutes after we saw it rising, I was pretty certain that the levee had to be breached. It was rising at such a rate.
Helmers grabbed his video camera and went up to this top floor stairwell. With the building swaying, he searched and searched but couldn't see the breach until visibility cleared enough for him to zoom in a half a mile away to the water pouring in.
When I saw that, I'm sure my coworkers had the same reaction. You know, my heart just dropped. Even though I knew the levees were breached before that, seeing it, and and just knowing that the fate of the city was sealed.
It's surreal. You took it in, and you wondered how high the water was going to be in the city.
And you can see that the 6-foot wall is gone.
My first instinct when we saw the levee break was, this is bigger than 9/11. I thought that the fatalities would be in the, thousands, if not tens of thousands. So it you know, it was heavy.
But as the water kept rising, they knew what their role would be: rescues.
As soon as we saw the water come in the parking lot, I'm thinking people are going to be dying soon. You know, that was my first thought.
By early afternoon, when the winds calmed enough, the firefighters swam out to find a boat. They found this blue one that today still sits along the condo parking lot wall. Captain Case hot-wired it, and they made the first of many life-saving trips into the neighborhood near the breach.
He was standing in his bathtub with water up to his chin when we got over there. And me and my firefighter, Pat Ball, broke the window out and was able to rescue him. He wasn't saying much. He barely could stand. And we got him in, and, you know, I don't think he would have made it much longer. The water was still rising at that point, and I think he would have surely drowned in the next few minutes.
The rescues continued for 4 days, from sunup until it was just too dark. The firefighters say there's a reason you haven't heard their story so many months after the storm. The video they shot of the levee breach was used in the recently completed congressional investigation. And while they testified, they were told to stay quiet about what they saw until it was over. And they say what they saw wasn't what was being reported in those first few months. They knew the levees didn't overtop, which was initially thought. And they knew the 9:45 a.m. time frame of the levee breach was also off.
Oh no, it certainly broke by 9 o'clock in the morning.
Captains Helmers, Case, and Fincher combined have been in the department for 56 years. But it will be those first 5 days of Katrina they'll never forget.
The whole thing I took in kind of like a snapshot in my mind. You know, remember this because this is something you're going to remember the rest of your life.
You're from New Orleans, right?
Yes, I've been a resident of New Orleans all my life.
Good, good, all right. Tell me what it's like to grow up in New Orleans as a young lady.
Well, I've gone through several phases, especially since I'm now in my 80s, so yeah. I've had a lot of time to grow. It was very different around prior to the World War II because it went through a bit of depression. I grew up first in a sort of the Faubourg Marigny section, and then we lived in my grandparents' home at the corner of Royal and Esplanade. It was quite an old building, historic building, probably about 200 years old.
In the French Quarter? In
the French Quarter at the corner of Royal and St. Anne. And we lived on the 3rd floor. We had quite a large apartment, and we did not have elevators. We had stairs.
Oh.
And of course, our schools were nearby. First of all, we went to the Catholic school, St. Mary's Parochial School at Ursuline and Ordes, all 5 of us. And then later, my sister and I went to John McDonough High School on Esplanade Avenue, and this was the school my mother had attended and graduated from back years ago. My brothers went to Peters, Nichols, and then one went to Holy Cross. And of course, about 1942, the war changed everything. But I have to say that prior to the war, we lived during an era of intense depression. Everything was so tight. But still, we survived. We managed very well.
Yeah, you were living at Aviators when the
Yes, when it started. Aviators is right about 200 feet from Bayou St. John. And the Greek church had a beautiful assembly hall, their church, plus a retirement home on the banks of Bayou St. John. And I was there that Sunday morning when the waters came. The night before, Katrina came with winds, not very strong, and Sunday morning was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. There was no water, there was no wind. And then a nephew called me and said that water had come, somehow something had happened. There was water along the highway. The highway. I can't remember the highway now.
Hammond Highway?
No, it's not Hammond. It's the one that's in New Orleans East, that highway. You can shepherd to a highway. And that he was worried about it, that it was coming in. And he had all of his furniture and everything was in Mississippi, and somehow it was hitting there too. I don't know from how it could hit there, but it could have been from the canal that was flowing off from the two lakes, Lake Bourne and Lake Pontchartrain. But I had no problem. But then I looked out about 9 o'clock, and there was a little water in the streets, just a little. And it didn't bother me at all. But about 2 hours later, it changed. The water started to rise. And my grandnephew living with me at the time called the Red Cross and asked them what was going on. And they didn't tell him anything except that he was afraid of water to get into the attic. And that was all they told him. But about noon, it changed. The water was getting higher, and I was worried. But not too worried. It wasn't in a house. And my house is high. It's one of the highest houses on the block. The water was about 2 or 3 feet below me. But about 4 o'clock, it changed. The water became rough. It was foaming. And when I looked out in the streets, it was actually rushing like a torrent. And then I looked and saw some dogs swimming towards me. These were the 5 dogs that belonged to a neighbor of mine. Evidently, she had left the night before. And they were coming to me for help because there was nowhere for them to rest. There was no car in their carport, and the waters had not yet reached 6 feet, and the poor little things came to me. And when I saw them, I rushed out and made them go back. I didn't want them to go any further because if they had, they would run into Bayou St. John, and there was simply no way they could rest there. And the poor little darlings swam back, all 5 of them. My own dog swam out to reach them, but he went down. He couldn't swim. So I told him to come back into the house, which he did, but by that time, everything had changed. The tables in my house were floating. The desks were floating, and I made the dogs get on top of one of the tables, but the table started to float. And my nephew said to me, I'm going to go and cross that bayou with some of my things, and I'll come back for you. And he did. By that time, the water was up to my waist. It was very turbulent, and I knew I had to get out. So I took both dogs with me, and we were in front of the house when my nephew came back and took the largest dog and swam across the bayou with him and put the dog in the hallway of the Greek church. The water had not yet reached that floor. Then he came back and took the little dog. By the time he came back the 3rd time, I had crossed from my area to my neighbor's area, and then his house was lower than mine by 2 or 3 feet, and then I realized I was in trouble. The water was up to my chin, but he did have a large bush there, a Japanese yew, and I clung to it. Now, Egan and I never did get along, and one of the things I thought of then was, gee, he could see me clinging to his bush. I wonder what he would say. But I didn't think any more about that because all of a sudden my prescriptions floated, and I started to go after them, and I realized my feet couldn't touch the ground. I also realized I couldn't swim. Then my nephew came back, and he says, if you can hold on to me and kick your feet a little, I'll take you across. I couldn't even kick my feet, but I never told him that, so I swam on his back until we reached the Greek Assembly Hall, and I got off on the 1st floor. Then he went back to get several more bundles of his clothes and also to get my shoes, because my shoes had floated off, and he went into my closet. I don't know how he got into the closet because by that time there was 3 or 4 feet of water in the house. And he came out with my shoes plus a grip of some of his clothes. He swam 5 or 6 times across that bayou. I didn't think my nephew could do it. He was such a quiet, scholastic, scholarly type of person, but he amazed me. He did swim across that bayou many times.
And who is this?
My nephew, Stacy Bastania. He's my grandnephew. He was living with me. His mother's deceased, and he had moved in with me about 7 months before. And that's where we spent the night, right there on the assembly. His car was parked in back of the Greek church, and he decided to park it on the levee. And it's fortunate that we did, and we sat in the car. It was about 5 or 6 o'clock then. The sun was shining, and we were surrounded by water. And we happened, fortunately, to pick the only dry, high spot on that side of the bayou. And we sat there all that night as the water came in. It never got any higher than maybe just about an inch or so above the neutral strip. But the bugs did come in from the water. But the dogs and I were in the back, and my nephew was in the front with all the other paraphernalia. And we did spend the night there. We didn't sleep, but at least we knew we were out of the water. And the next morning, there was still water, and boats came by and told us we should get out. And the first boat refused to take my dogs. The lady offered to keep them, but I said no, they would come with me. The second boat came and said I had to get out. So they took the 2 dogs and myself, and all around was water. I hadn't realized how deep, how much of it had flowed in. All of Robert E. Lee and let's see, what's that section? St. Bernard Avenue were covered by water. So the boat took us to the corner there, and we were transferred to another boat that was specifically there to pick us up. They took us there with the 2 dogs. They told us they were actually from Iowa, and they had come with their boats and volunteered, and they were doing a lot of the rescue work. And of course, as we went along the waters, I was amazed to see that all the bus signs were right there in front of me. The bus signs were flooded. And they told me that as they had gone there before, during previous hours, they had rescued a little girl, 11 years old, on the 2nd floor. But her mother, unfortunately, was dead. She was floating in the attic. And then we went along what I thought was a lake, except that it was the streets that were flooded. We went down all the area, all the way down to Canal Boulevard. And all those 2-story houses were covered. There was water there. And then they took us to the 610 at Canal Boulevard, and there they deposited us on the 610, my 2 dogs and I. There was a bus there to pick us up, and they took us into the 610 and the I-10 in Metairie. And once we got there, we walked off, and they told us to go ahead and see where we could find a place. And I walked up there for 1 or 2 hours. There were crowds of people there sitting, waiting for bus. And under the underpass, under the overpass rather, there was a makeshift hospital with the cots, sick people lying there, and just 1 doctor and 1 nurse. The reason I know that is I went to get some prescriptions from the nurse, and she couldn't help me. She was too busy with all those patients. And every few hours, an ambulance would drive up and take off one of the patients. There were buses coming to take the people who were there, but I only saw one come about maybe once a day, and it really didn't take too many people. And of course, my dogs were restless. We'd had no food, no water. So I walked much further away from the 610, and all I could see were people sitting on the railings out there in the hot sun. And then I looked beyond, and I saw some tarpaulins going up, different people putting up tarpaulins so they could sit in the shade. And I saw a group of men putting up the tarpaulins, and I said, "Oh, can you take me in?" And they said yes. They were putting up tarpaulins 10 by 10 just to accommodate people. And this is where I met some very staunch friends. There was Alex Azar, and there was Bart, I forget his last name, and they said we could sit there under there. We had about 10 other people sitting under that top, and we were just delighted to sit on it because it relieved us from that hot, intense sun. By that time, it was about 5 or 6 o'clock, and it was still sunny because the sun didn't go down till 8 o'clock. And this is where I sat on that grass. And we did have these, I guess these are meals prepared by the Army, the MRAs, something like that. E's. And they contain a hamburger and some bread and some cookies and some candies. And they all went and got the MREs. And I got 2. And each dog got a hamburger, and I got the bread and the cookies. And of course, we were all given bottles of water, amen. So we all spent the night there. I guess there were about 10 of us under that top, and next to us were other tops with other groups of people, and that's where I spent the first night. And I was really grateful to be on the grass. It wasn't the same as if we were in a place that was safer. Finally, on Thursday, Al and Bart suggested that we walk to the highway and see if someone would give us a ride anywhere out of there. And as we left, there were police cars there, and they told us we really shouldn't leave, that we should remain there. But we continued to walk, and we were on the highway. Well, no one wants an elderly woman with 2 dogs, so we sat on the side, and Alex and Bart held up the little money we pooled among us. I think we must have had maybe $10, $12, that's about all, and they would hold it up. And as the individuals passed, they would offer the money, but no one would stop. I think they would have picked up Al and Bart, but when they saw me and the dogs, that was different. Finally, after about 2 hours, a boat came along with
SUV.
An SUV came along with a boat, and they stopped. And this was Brian Clump and Suzanne Lawson, and they were in the car, the RV. And when Al and Bart said, "Here's the money, would you pick us up?" They said, "We'll pick you up if we don't want the money." Well, they were hysterical. I didn't think I could pick up the dogs fast enough to get there, but we made it. So the dogs went into the back. Alex and Bart and I were in the second seat, and then Suzanne and Brian drove off with us. They had actually come to volunteer their services, but they were told the services would not be accepted and they should drive off immediately or the boat would be confiscated. The reasoning behind that, I believe, was that they were waiting for the Coast Guard, I think, to come in, or the National Guard, Louisiana National Guard, to come in and do the rescue, and they didn't want anyone else doing it. But their loss was our gain because we drove all the way to Baton Rouge in an air-conditioned car. And then when we got to Baton Rouge, we dropped Bart off. No, we went on to Suzanne's mother's home. Her aunt and her relatives were there. They had come in from Lafayette, Louisiana, as a safety hazard, and they were there to offer us food and showers. It was marvelous. And the dogs, they put them out there on the grass and gave them water and food. And this is where life turned around for us. So we all had something to eat. We all bathed, and they did launder our clothes for us. It was real nice. We'd had those clothes on so long. And then about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we drove off to Lafayette, and we stopped at the home of Brian's parents in Lafayette. And then we stayed there for an hour or so, and then we went on to Bazille, Louisiana. No, we stopped first in Opelousas. That's right, we stopped first in Opelousas. But we had also dropped off Bart at his relatives in Baton Rouge. He had a relative he wanted to remain. So when we got to Lafayette, Bart was not with us. But when we got Suzanne and Brian and Al, Azar, and I, we got to a place in Opelousas called the Gold Cup. and we parked the car outside. The dogs went to sleep in the air-conditioned car and went inside. And we went into a very bright and cheerful bar. It's a local bar, and there were several residents from Opelousas in the area there, and as soon as we walked in, and Suzanne knew the bartender, they were friends of hers, everybody was welcoming us there. Everybody was crying. They knew we were from New Orleans instantly, and they were all so sympathetic. And so we sat there, and it's been years since I sat at a bar. You see, I'm in my 80s, and we didn't sit at bars. We used to sit at lounges. But this was an experience to think that in the morning I had been on this grass in Metairie, and here I was after a wonderful meal, a bath, and clean clothes. I was sitting at a bar, and I'm getting a drink, but I didn't know what to order. It's been so long since I ordered anything. But I had a whiskey sour, and all of us had a drink, and we had a hell of a good time. There was a music box there, but I didn't know it was a music box. It had all these little bright lights on it, and I said, it's a music box. So different from the ones I used to look at before. And then the lady there, she and her husband did own the bar. She said, we have a wonderful dinner cooked for you all. It's deer meat with rice and gravy. So we had dinner too, right there at the bar, a wonderful meal. So I said, I can't believe that this morning I was on the grass, and here I am tonight. I'm having a drink at a bar. So we left, I guess, about midnight, went on to these little dark roads, you know. I'm from New Orleans, and these little roads, with all those ditches. I was sure there were alligators coming out of it, but we made it. We made it all the way to Brazil and drove down, and we went to Brian's ranch house. He and Suzanne had really packed up things. They were planning to leave in a few days, but when they got to the ranch house, Brian's friend, Sue, she's also his real estate agent, was there. She was there with her family. They had left Marrero, which is in Jefferson Parish, to come there. So all together, when we walked into that room that night, into the ranch house, there were 22 of us, all refugees from Katrina. And we were all so happy to be there. And somehow we all managed. They put me, the two dogs, into the den. It was air conditioned. I had a mattress, and believe it or not, there was a bathroom there. So my two dogs and I slept on a mattress in an air-conditioned room that night. And I said, I can't believe how paradox life can be. I started out, and I thought I'd never see anything, and here I am in this air-conditioned den, and it's really well-maintained, and Brian used it as a computer room. And with bathroom facilities, and of course the ranch house had all the other accommodations. Of course, I think they didn't fare as well as I did. They had these inflated mattresses, and they used the floor and the 2 bedrooms upstairs and the 2 bathrooms, and we all went to sleep that night.
How long were you there?
Oh, Brazil was an experience for me. I was there from that Thursday in September. That would be just about the 1st of September until January the 8th of the following year. And it really was a very unusual experience. It was completely different. I was surrounded by about 10 acres of land, and next to that was an old plantation home, Jolene, that Brian owned and was selling. And there were cows, all of these black cows that would look at me. And then there was also my dogs who would get hysterical when they saw the cows. They didn't know what they were. And there were barns, and then Brian Clump, his family, owned a lot. His family members owned a lot of the land around there. He had cousins all around, and they were all a part of it. They all came. They brought us food. They brought in a washing machine. We had to, someone gave us a refrigerator, and they brought us food, and we just adjusted. It was so nice to get up in the morning. Sue was a great cook. She would cook the breakfast, and they had some food stamps. And then in 1 or 2 days, we all went into town and got food stamps. And the Red Cross was there to help us. FEMA contacted us to give us our initial check so that we could have something to use for cash. And of course, I had nothing. All the last cash we'd had been, we had tried to use to give to Brian. He wouldn't take it, so we just used it for food. And I think there were about 2 or 3 cars among us, and this we used to go anywhere, anyhow. We went into the Red Cross for checkups, and of course, all of Jennings had these little places where you could get food. Meals, they were served. At any time during the day, you could go in some place and get a meal. We got our little food stamps. We also got clothes. The Red Cross gave us clothes. And then we started our rural way of life. It was pretty. Brazil has a tiny cemetery, lots of rice fields, crawfish fields, and it was quite a different experience. Of course, we all tried to get on the internet to try to notify our relatives where we were. We tried to notify the Red Cross. In fact, we all did as a clearinghouse to let us know who had survived. Because everyone in my family knew I wasn't going to leave, and unfortunately, they thought that perhaps something had happened to me. In fact, the house was flooded. It was flooded for 8 feet in the house, and it stayed that way for 10 days. In the meantime, one of my nieces, who had lived in St. Bernard Parish and evacuated to Covington, they had actually sent someone to check the house to see if there were bodies in it long before the water went down. They were just sure I'd be floating around there. Unfortunately, I wasn't. Oh, I made such great friends with everyone there. It's unbelievable how 22 people who don't know each other can get along so well. We had wonderful meals. At night they did barbecues. The neighbors brought the meat, the food. They helped us with the washing machines, and it became a way of life. Of course, I had the best deal of all. I was there in the den with the dogs. But I would try to get out in the day so anybody else could use it, and I sat in the patio outside with the 2 dogs, and we watched the cows. Let's see what else I can tell. We tried to get cell phones, but the cell phones didn't function too well out there. We managed to get on the internet to notify our relatives that we were alive. We registered with the Red Cross, and then gradually we all found that everyone had survived. We were all fortunate. All we had lost was our property. I won't say all, but when you think you're alive, well, property becomes meaningless.
So what was the name of that little town?
Brazil. They call it Timamu, Little Timamu.
Little Mamu. So what do you remember most about being out in the country in Timamu?
It was an entirely new experience. I've never seen so many cows. And at night, the coyotes were in the woods back of the cows, and they would sing at night. They would never venture out to harm anyone, but you could hear them. It's a singing sound. And the stars. I have never seen such beautiful stars. You could not see them in the city. They didn't show at all. But out there, I saw everything. It looks as if the stars were just falling. And at night, you'd go out and see the stars, especially when I took the dogs out at night. And I would hold on to them because I didn't want them to get lost. And then I'd hear the coyotes, and I said, well, this is a little bit different. I don't think I've ever experienced this before. And I remember that everyone was so grateful. Everyone would always bring food or invite us for meals. And we managed to, all of us, utilize the cars to take us to Jennings. And we all had to check in at the hospital at one time. It was we all really seemed to manage so well, considering that we didn't know each other. The other part I must tell is the part I'd rather not tell, but I must tell. The water that my dogs drank poisoned them, and Mustang, my beautiful, loving dog, it affected him. After a few days, he was barking constantly, and one night he started to fight with the little dog, and Suzanne had to separate us because he was biting, and he was tired at night. But he was trying to tell me that he was hurting, and he cried all night, and we tied him to a tree. I was afraid to take him into the den. And the next morning, DJ and Brian took me to this place, Jolene, which is just about 5 minutes away, and took Mustang and tied him to a tree. And then I petted him, and he thought I was going to get something for him to eat. And then DJ fired one shot and put him out of his misery. And they did bury him there, beneath an oak at Jolene. See, I'm in Lafayette now, and I'm participating in this movie in an effort to tell my story. I wish I could tell it better, but this is the first time I've been a movie star.
So how did you feel when you heard the news that the flooding of New Orleans was really the result of Army Corps of Engineers' incompetence and neglect in their duty to maintain levees that protected the New Orleans area, and was really not a result of Katrina, but a result of the Army Corps of Engineers' incompetence?
I'm very bitter about that. And it was not Katrina. Everyone speaks of Katrina's winds. There were no winds. That Sunday morning, it was a beautiful day. There was sun. And the night before, there were no winds to talk of. And I have 4 picture windows in my house. Not one of them rattled. But I can hardly believe that our representatives could have done this to us. We had some very capable ones over the past years. I cannot imagine why they did not reinforce this. I'm sure the funds were there. I think if the proper supervision had been given as the repairs were being made, they could have been made. I can't understand why this was allowed. And not only did the flooding occur at the 17th Street Canal. That's where it really occurred severely. It also occurred at the London Avenue Canal, and it occurred at the other levees that we had, crisscrossing. I mean, I cannot imagine how they could have let this happen.
So it's been over 2 years. How much have you received from the government to rebuild your house?
From the government, I have received nothing. The only monies I have received have been from our insurance company, and they only gave me a certain percentage. And they didn't give me all that I should. And as far as from the government, all FEMA has given me, I think approximately $2,000 they gave us all for living expenses, I think for 6 months, something like that.
How cooperative were the insurance companies in?
The insurance companies, I cannot believe I've been part of the insurance industry myself for many years. I was amazed how uncooperative they were. I even had to get the Acadian Legal Services in Lafayette to write them letters because I refused to accept the small settlements they made initially. So I think individually I may have received a little more than most because I was persistent, but I don't believe I should have had to put the effort that I did. I think I should have done it. I've always had flood insurance. I paid those premiums for years. I think it should have been done willingly.
Didn't you have to get the Attorney General involved before they responded at all?
Yes, I had to get them to write. I wrote to the insurance commissioner, but I have found that they were not strong enough. When they wrote me a letter, it was mostly as if they were telling me to try to work with them. It wasn't as if they were in any way chastising them. I thought that our insurance commissioner was more or less just serving as a referee. The strongest letters came from the Acadian Legal Service, plus me over the phone, or plus my short letters telling them, send me my check or else. Because I did return a check.
Why did you return that check?
It wasn't enough. I told them it wasn't about to accept a check like that.
60 cents on the dollar?
Yes, just 60 cents on the dollar. And that's when I wrote to the insurance commissioner, and his letter was so moral. I said, well, this is one person I will not vote for the next time we have an election.
You mean if this one doesn't go to jail too, like the other ones have?
Well, if they send anybody to jail, they're going to have to send a lot of the officials from New Orleans. The jails will be crowded.
So you also heard about the police commissioner confiscating weapons?
Yes, I did hear about that.
In violation of people's Second Amendment rights?
Right, I've heard about that, which leaves all of New Orleans defenseless because there is so much crime there, and there are not sufficient policemen.
So should such a man be prosecuted?
Oh, definitely. I think they all should be prosecuted, particularly the Corps of Engineer. It was even worse in St. Bernard Parish, because those poor people, their homes, I think, collapsed more, plus Murphy Oil added to the misery. But I have to say that Murphy Oil has since stepped forward as a private corporation, and all of those individuals who lost their homes have received as much reimbursement from Murphy Oil as they have received from their insurance companies.
So we've really seen New Orleans corruption at its worst, where officials sworn to serve have become criminals and thieves and destroyed a whole city and is refusing to be held accountable for it.
Oh, yes, plus the first 2 days they were not well organized at all. I can't help but feel that somehow people calling into the Red Cross or other places for help or assistance, people who were trapped in attics and people unfortunately did not survive being trapped in attics. Why didn't someone say, get out, the levees have broken? At least they could have gotten out in 4 and 5 feet of water, because when it comes to 7, 8, 9 feet of water, you cannot get out.
Well, there was a mandatory evacuation.
There was a mandatory evacuation, but no one anticipated water. And when it did happen, they had 2 days to tell you.
Well, they really didn't tell us anything but to get out. They didn't say, get out, the levees are going to break.
Well, they didn't know the levees were going to break at that time.
I think somebody knew the levees were going to break.
But
You don't evacuate a city of 1 million people because you think a hurricane is coming. It's never happened before. Somebody knew a levee was going to break. That's why they ordered 1 million people out of the city.
But they should have said it in plain language. Remember, when the 17th Street Canal broke near those apartments, do you realize those are fragile little apartments along that area? There's only, they're just little single units. Those people never had a chance with the force of the water. And the Fleur-de-Lis subdivision, which is a very top-level subdivision with 2-story houses, very substantial, the pictures later looked as if it was trash that had been deposited on the street. You saw no semblance of any structures there. The force just knocked those people out. In fact, it was Bart, who was one of our survivors, who just managed to get out with his 2 little bags. He was in one of those apartments. If he hadn't gotten out on his own in the very beginning, he never would have made it. He could have, the roof of his isn't high enough for the water that swept through and down into Lakeview.
So if you could say something to your elected representatives right now, what would it be?
You will not be my representative anymore. It has to be someone determined to help us. And I have to say, this is such a catastrophe, a huge catastrophe, that it was mind-boggling. I think everyone involved, our local officials, were in severe shock. I was so delighted when I saw the National Guard come on when I got to Brazil 3 or 4 days later in their khaki uniforms and say in very positive tones that they were taking over, they had guns, they were going to shoot looters, they were going to shoot anybody who transgressed, and they were taking over. I said, isn't this wonderful? Why didn't you come a whole week sooner?
They have to come at the behest of the governor. Governor finally called them.
Probably so, but I think our officials at the time were in such shock, and I guess they were in much shock as I was. I don't think they really reacted. We were too destitute there for days, as if everything was hanging loose. I don't know where I would have gone if I hadn't found these guys. And I latched on to them.
So you're staying in Lafayette?
Oh, I love Lafayette. It is so lush and green. I never thought I would live in any city other than New Orleans. I've always thought it was a great city. I like it. But those memories are so vivid now. And the area I'm in is right next to City Park, the back end of City Park, and I know it's gone. I know those oak trees are gone. It was a beautiful park. It's all gone. I wish I could do more to help, but it comes at a time when I just don't have the reserves I would have had at an earlier time. As inconvenienced as I am, my greatest sympathy goes out to all the citizens who are in the midst of their lives. They have families, they have children to send to school, their jobs disappeared, the whole neighborhood disappeared. The vet can't operate, the pharmacy's gone, all the restaurants are gone, the university couldn't operate, everything died. At least I have a Social Security check.
The Army Corps of Engineers killed the whole city. So in concluding, What would you like to say?
I hope the city returns. I hope I live long enough to see it return. I'll try, and I will do everything with my efforts to revive the city. But until we have the leaders who will do this, I see no prospects of it. I hope the next election brings a whole group of leaders. New Orleans had its civic leaders. Somehow they seem to have disappeared. I hope they are revitalized.